Welcome to Orthodontic Smiles, the podcast designed for all dentists and their staffs who practice orthodontics. This podcast is brought to you by the American Orthodontic Society. Today on Orthodontic Smiles podcast, we travel to Carlsbad, California to interview the general manager of the largest and fastest growing orthodontic supply company in the world, Henry Schein Orthodontics. It was a great thrill to be able to interview our next guest, who is so informative about all of his products that you would think you were talking to a qualified orthodontist. But indeed, he is not, but knows probably more about orthodontics than many of us. And here is our next guest, Mr. Ted Dreifuss. Orthodontic Smiles welcomes today Mr. Ted Dreifuss. He is the general manager of Henry Schein Orthodontics, the fastest growing international orthodontic company in the world. And I'm not talking about the United States, I'm talking about the world. Thank you so much, Ted, for joining us on Orthodontic Smiles podcast. This should be really, really interesting because you guys are in the news constantly. Every time I open my emails, there's something from Henry Schein Orthodontics.
Well, thanks, Ed. Thanks for having me on the program. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, great. Let's get started by starting with, how did you get into this position?
Yeah, so I've been in the medical device field for many years. Most of my career has been spent in specialty areas of dentistry, and within that, most of those years has been in the orthodontics field. And before coming to Henry Schein Ortho, to Henry Schein, I was with one of the other big companies in the industry for a lot of years, and had a terrific time. Always have had a great love for orthodontics, interacting with orthodontists and orthodontic practitioners, and just seeing the development over the years, all the new technology that's come into the space that is really making some really some big changes, some big advancements. And then in more recent years, the technologies have been coming faster and with more profound impact, in for the most part in a real positive manner for patients, for doctor staffs, and for the practices themselves. So I had the opportunity to join Henry Schein. It's almost 7 years ago. In fact, next weekend is going to be my 7th year anniversary with Henry Schein, and I came on board at the company. Henry Schein had gotten into the orthodontic space through a number of acquisitions. The company had acquired Ortho Organizers and Maisel, Class 1, Ortho Technologies, and a couple of others. And so, the company was really looking for, how are we going to position all these brands and all these products to become really relevant in the orthodontic space. And so they kind of brought me in and gave me the responsibility to build out a team and start, reimagining what we could be in the orthodontic market segment.
Well, you obviously felt that the Carrier motion appliance back then, and 7 years ago, I guess it was referred to as a Carrier distalizer. You obviously felt that was something you could hang your hat on. It probably it probably wasn't doing as well as it is now.
Yeah, it was a really interesting situation in that it took a while to really figure out what it was. The device you're referring to, the Carrier distalizer at the time, was on the market, had been on the market for several years, had gained, a certain level of popularity. People that were using it, loved what they were seeing and the tooth movement that they were seeing and how quickly they could correct class twos with it. But I looked at it like I think most people did initially, as a replacement for headgear, a replacement for some of these other class two devices on the market. There were some inherent advantages to the product. It's a direct bonded appliance, which means it's simple to measure, to place, and to activate. It's very discreet and comfortable for patients. But until I started listening to Dr. Carriere and looking at some of the scans, it wasn't until until a couple of years in that we really started seeing a complex series of not just tooth movement but jaw relationship changes that were really quite remarkable, and it soon became very apparent that it wasn't a issue of distalization. It wasn't just this device distalizing the maxillary arch of the maxilla. In fact, it wasn't distalizing the maxilla at all. Most of the changes that occurred in the upper arch were with rotation of the upper first molars, but everything else was really in the mandible. The mandible appeared, in these scans, the T1s and the T2s, to be coming down and forward, and then most interestingly, changes in the occlusal plane. And so we went back and really started studying this with some other very, very smart docs and looking deep into the X-rays and the Cephs and the scans, and saying, yeah, this is not a distalizer at all. Why are we even calling it that? So we, based on that, we rebranded it as the Motion 3D appliance, because it's really moving things in 3 dimensions and changing so much more. It's actually changing things in all planes of space.
Absolutely.
And it really moved. We observed that this is not just a small product that can affect the teeth and the jaw relationship, but it's really part of a treatment solution. And it became known then because of the fact that the motion appliance is used at the beginning of treatment to correct the jaw replacement, the jaw positioning, and it does so in a very short period of time. We coined the term sagittal first. Rather than treating a class 2 malocclusion, or in the case of class 3, you deep into treatment when you've got braces and all the arch bars and everything are tied in, patients are getting burned out. With the motion appliance, is used at the beginning of treatment. At the beginning of treatment, when patients are most excited about their treatment and are going to be most compliant with what you ask them to do. And so therefore,
Ted, just to give it a little bit of a historical perspective from people who may not have heard the history of all of this, this appliance is probably about 10 years old altogether, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, because I remember receiving my first one from you all with not a whole lot of instruction, and I think I might have told you this before. I had no idea how to use it. I had to call the office to find out some basic instructions, and I happened to have had my grandson who was a class 2 skeletal, and I was more concerned about the molar, and the only thing I was really thinking about was maybe a headgear for him. But it turns out that he wore this appliance. I figured I'd put it on him. He lived next door to me, so if something was looking bad, I could remove it. And sure enough, within about 3 to 4 months, his class 2 skeletal totally disappeared, and he ended up with a beautiful, beautiful set of teeth without a headgear, and that sold me right then and there. And this was way before you called it a motion appliance, way before Carriere came out with the fact that it could correct a skeletal class 2. So historically, as I introduced it and to the podcast world, when I interviewed Carriere, he said to me, I didn't know it corrected class 2 skeletal at the time. And so that's why they called it the distalizer. But he said, as we progressed and started doing more and more research, they found that it really did bring that mandible forward and correct the class 2 skeletal. And sure as heck, countless numbers of patients later, as I see it, it has been well renowned to be able to help in that hardest thing we do. Hardest thing we do is the skeletal class 2. So congratulations. I mean, you've promoted something that really has changed the orthodontic world.
Yeah, no, it really has it. The device and the treatment solution, the Motion 3D device, and the concept of sagittal first, is taken off like a rocket in the last several years.
It didn't used to be sagittal first. It started out not being sagittal first. I think it's a great idea because you do get a lot more compliance at the very beginning, and that's one of the reasons why you use it first. But that kind of goes against the grain a little bit, Ted.
Well, it changes the typical process, right? Typically, with braces cases, for instance, you start out with a thin, light, very flexible arch wire, an 014 copper night tie for leveling and aligning, and then you start moving up through a series of arch wires that are getting larger and heavier. Until you get to, you're correcting the rotations, you're changing, you're doing all of your tooth positioning, basically, as you know. And then once you've got your tooth positioning pretty much in place and heavy arch wires in place, typically stainless steel arch wires, then, it's 14, 16 months into treatment. And then you say, okay, now let's address the sagittal. Let's now address the overjet that we have. But what's happening? At that point in time, patients are already fatigued. They're already complaining. Every time they come into the office, what's the first thing they say? When am I getting my braces off? And then trying to gain the compliance of a patient at that point in time, to ask them to wear elastics for 4, 5, 6, 7 months, just like you said, it's the most difficult thing that you do as a clinician now. And that's why one of the major reasons that so many cases, such a large percentage of cases, run overtime. So by flipping that and moving the sagittal correction from deep into treatment to the very front end of treatment, not only are you, getting the patient now started on the sagittal correction when they're most enthusiastic, excited about treatment, but the mechanics are very different as well, because now you've segmented the arch where there's no braces, no wires on when the motion appliance is placed. So therefore, from a biomechanical perspective, things are going to move much more freely and easily as well. So you have both the patient motivation aspect as well as a biomechanical aspect. Putting those two together, you're correcting the jaw relationship, that class 2, no matter how big the overjet may be, of course, within reason, very, not only quickly, but predictably.
You're not even speaking to the early treatment aspects of using the Carriere, because I'm a pediatric dentist, and I typically get into using the Carriere motion appliance when we still have primary cuspids. And
sure.
Boy, what a change that makes. It's within months, 1 to 2 to 3 months, and you've got that whole thing totally corrected and growing the way you want it to grow.
And so the outcome of that, if you go from a patient to thinking about a patient population in a practice that has, everybody that walks in the door has a different type of malocclusion, different degrees of difficulty and complexity. What the motion, and so therefore in typical practice, you go into it with either braces or aligners, and you're working your way through, and you're almost re-diagnosing the case on every appointment. The cool thing, the real powerful thing about the motion appliance and the sagittal first concept is everybody, almost all patients will be candidates for a motion appliance for the sagittal first treatment philosophy. And after that 2 to 4 month period, they're now on a class 1 platform. They're now on a class 1 platform with most of the crowding already resolved. And what that means is now walking through to finish the case in either braces or aligners is greatly simplified, because now when you go into active treatment with braces or aligners, every case is in a class 1 platform. How much easier does that make to run a practice?
And that's what when I teach in my courses, I said, what would you like to come into your office? You'd love to have a class 1 molar, class 1 skeletal, a nice broad arch, no crowding, and then they ask you to put braces on.
And you straighten the teeth and finish the case.
I mean, you're looking at maybe what used to be an 18-month or 2-year case. You're looking at an 8-month case, just by having those positions in the right place. But you didn't just come out with Carrier. Just didn't come out with this motion appliance for class 2s. He's now introduced the class 3 motion appliance, which is very innovative.
So that's a real life changer. That's a real life changer for patients and a real game changer for practices. Because if you think about patients that come in with a class 3 malocclusion, and picture this, 8 or 9 or 10-year-old, young lady or young man who has, mid-face deficiency, protrusive mandible, poor function, and aesthetics are terrible. And then just think about the psychosocial aspect of it. How a lot of these kids are challenged now in their social area with school and everything else. It's a very, very difficult situation for these kids. And then what treatment solutions do we have to offer them? We have to offer them a surgical approach, which is the surgery is very heavy to fix a class 3. Very expensive, very invasive, and just not something anybody would look forward to for themselves or their children. The only option today really is a face mask, and so you take this face mask device, and they're effective, right? They will work over time, but you add to the whole psychosocial issue with a child. Now they have to wear this thing, and a man trying to answer, with their cell phone, whatever. It's just not a comfortable appliance. It looks terrible. It's just so many issues. The Carrier Motion, the 3D Class 3 device, is an intraoral direct bonded appliance, just like the class 2 device, and very, very discreet, very low profile, and therefore very comfortable, and so easy for the office to use. But most incredibly is how effective it is. It is so effective. Again, it's bonded from the lower first molar to the lower cuspid, direct bonded appliance, very low profile, very discreet. It's activated with an elastic up to the cuspid, and the amount of time, again, because the mandibular bone is very different from the bone in the maxilla, the teeth move very quickly. And the results are just astonishing. The profiles of these patients change so quickly. Again, it's life-changing for these patients. It's such a remarkable treatment solution, that is so dramatically better than anything else.
It's dramatic. And these patients really want an outcome that changes their profile. There's no question about it. And I can tell you, just from personal experience using it, it has really changed the way I approach these kids, and I approach them very early, and even in the primary dentition, and what a difference it makes. I mean, it's so much easier than using a reversible headgear. There's no doubt about that.
Oh, my goodness. And, talking about these things is one thing, but seeing is really believing. And so I would encourage your listeners to take a look at the Henry Schein Orthodontics website, or go to YouTube. And we have a lot of really great videos on YouTube. You can just use a keyword, search words with Carrier or Motion 3D, sagittal first, any of those keywords.
You've got some really good YouTubes out there that really explain the whole process, and I use them often when I'm doing my consultations to help the patients and the parents understand what we're doing. I agree. But one little thing, it's a little thing, but it makes such a difference, and I'll just ask you to expound on it a little bit, and that's elastics. It's so different using the Force 1 and Force 2 elastics using the motion appliance. Expound on that just a bit.
Yeah, so we've had clinicians that have used the motion appliance, and will call us up and will say, hey, I haven't quite seen the tooth movement that you guys have been advertising, quote unquote advertising, or what I've seen at some of the programs and some of the videos, and that's always concerning to us. And so one of the questions that we come back to now is we ask, well, what elastics did you use? And it's very important because the elastics are really the elastics are what activates the appliance. And so we did develop the elastics that are really engineered and calibrated for use with the Motion 3D appliance. And it's very simple. There's only two elastics, and one is called the Force 1. The second one is called the Force 2. And they're Force 1 and Force 2 because they are used in that sequence. So patients start out with the Force 1 elastic for the first several weeks, and then they transition to Force 2. And invariably, when a clinician has gone back and has called and suggested that they were having some issue, and they go back and they do in fact now follow the protocol, invariably we'll get a call back, saying, oh, thank you so much. You're absolutely right. I went back and I wasn't using the appropriate elastics. I went back and with Force 1 and Force 2, following the protocols as part of the system. It's working absolutely beautifully.
Absolutely. And if we are doing anything right today, talking to 5,000 of our listeners, if in fact they're using the Carriere and they're not getting the success they thought, I definitely suggest to them go look at the elastics, because that really makes all the difference in the world, and how quickly everything starts to change when you use the appropriate elastic force. And one of the things that I've gotten this week, actually, Ted, which was an article, and I don't have it in front of me, but it was, let's talk about airway just a minute. Well, one of the concerns that we've had over the past was that maybe the Carriere might be like the headgear, closing the airway. And in pediatric sleep apnea patients, that's always a concern using a headgear. But this article came out actually suggesting that the airway opens as a result of the mandible coming forward, and it could help to alleviate some of the sleep apnea problems, or at least the airway problems that some kids have.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. That study was very, very interesting, very well done study, and it was showing exactly that, with the changes in the positioning of the mandible, that there were statistically significant improvements in airway volume, and anecdotally and clinically, that's what so many of the users of the Motion appliance and the Sagittal First concept are reporting, and lots of them. There's lots of clinicians out there that are using iCAT's 3D imaging and taking those measurements and seeing tremendous results.
Seeing the air volume change as expansion is taking place. I'm still a proponent. My personal opinion is I'm still a proponent of expansion first in the very early years, 6, 7, 8 years old, and then moving into, if we have a Class 2 relationship, then moving into the Carriere to correct the Class 2 relationship, whether it be skeletal or dental. But that's everybody's got their own way of doing it, and I understand that. It's just clinical experience and the way you find a way to work with your patients.
Yeah, and it's just, the most exciting thing is, and the most, the thing that I think we should all be excited about is the increased awareness of these sleep disordered breathing problems. The problem for years has been either unrecognized in so many of these kids, or they've been diagnosed with having ADD or ADHD, and as you know, and as so many of your listeners know, boy, when a child is not getting restful sleep, he's a mouth breather, he or she's snoring, they're not getting rest, they're having the apneic problems throughout the night. During the day, they're sleepy, they're drowsy, they're not learning. and they're not learning, and they're fidgeting in their seat. So the teacher will look at them and see this child fidgeting all over. Well, he's fidgeting because he or she's trying to stay awake. It's not socially acceptable to fall asleep in school, right? And so more and more clinicians now, dentists and orthodontists, are really looking for problems associated.
Well, I hope they do. I hope they do. That's something that we've all been promoting, and it's a very, very important thing. I think one of the very first things we should ask every pediatric patient that comes into our office is how they're doing in school. Are they grinding at night? Are they snoring at night? Are they learning well? Are they sleeping during the day? Those kinds of things are instrumental in being able to change a life. And if we do not catch that at an early age, it develops into a process that actually reduces lifespan. And we are in a position as dental clinicians to change lives. And unlike we used to think that all we did was treat little teeth and take cavities out of teeth, we now have the data behind us to show that we can make a difference in people's lives. And
unfortunately, it's not happening very often at the pediatrician's offices or other places.
No.
And so having a dentist, orthodontist, any orthodontic practitioner, at least increasing the awareness level, so they are looking for these issues, whether the child's all the things you mentioned, plus whether or not they're snoring, whether they're whether or not they're breathing. They're bedwetting, mouth breathers, all of these things. And whether a clinician decides to incorporate dental sleep medicine into their practice or not, at least just the awareness and saying, hey, we think we might have an issue here based on the medical history and our clinical observations. Let's at least get you to a clinician. Either we're trained up on the issue, or to a practice that may be, and so we can get this problem.
Well, we know so much more now, Ted, about the fact that narrow arches and the ability to be able to breathe through the nose as a result of the palate being so narrow. That is just, we know that now. So it's just a matter of being able, as clinicians, to get in there and do some expansion therapy and do some anterior posterior work, sagittal work, like you have proposed with the sagittal first concept. I think that's just remarkable. But you have some other products that are coming out. I mean, I am excited to hear about some of the other products that you're about ready to come out with, and they all kind of tie into the sagittal first concept. So talk about it.
Yes. Yeah, so a couple of areas. First of all, on the braces side, and then we'll get to aligners in a moment. But we have a couple of new things on the braces side. A new self-ligating bracket called SLX 3D bracket system, both in metal and in clear, and they're remarkable. They're the smoothest, most comfortable, easy to use, and most reliable self-ligating braces that we've ever produced. So patients love them because they're so comfortable, they're so low profile, and the clear ones blend into the teeth so beautifully. Staff members love them, and the docs love them.
You gave me the thrill of a lifetime to be able to come to your facility and see how they were made. And I got to tell you, I was so impressed with the way you make that clear bracket. It is remarkable. Yeah. I mean, the way that the spring is inserted into the bracket itself and how it self-engages over the wire is just, I mean, that is just the most remarkable concept in engineering that I've ever seen.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun watching the engineers translate the desires of the clinicians that were on the Desire staff, and taking the ideas from the docs and what they had in their minds of what the ideal bracket system would look like in terms of comfort and ease of use and durability and predictability. And the engineers, we have the most remarkable engineers here at Henry Schein Orthodontics, and them translating all of that into the design and then production of these appliances has been really fascinating and very exciting.
There's hundreds of different self-ligating brackets out there, and to look at the technology and the engineering that goes into the way a bracket is made and the kinds of things you think about when you are putting together a bracket that is for mass production. I'm thrilled to be able to say that I had the opportunity to see how they're made, and I've learned so much more from it, and take it to, it's not to say that Henry Schein is the only company in the world, but I think you guys have really taken an engineering step into the future.
We thank you, and I'm so glad you were here to see all that, because we are very proud of our facility here in Southern California, where we make all of our brackets, the technologies that we have in place, and the skill sets, the skill level of our what we call TSMs, our Team Schein members. We're so proud of all of them. You know what, Ed? I was going to tell you about something else that we just released just a week ago. Within orthodontics, correcting the sagittal has always been one of the most challenging things, as you said, and so we've got a great treatment solution for that in the Motion 3D. The other thing that's been difficult for a lot of practitioners over the years, both in terms of case management and inventory control and those sorts of things, has been arch wires. Yeah. As you know, there's not a lot of commonality between practices and patient to patient, and therefore we've seen docs that use as many as 5, 6, 7, 8 different arch wires per patient, and a lot of times patient comes in for the next appointment, and again it's almost like you're re-diagnosing the case, trying to determine what arch wire should I change the arch wire today, should we leave it in to for another 3 or 4 weeks, and if I am going to change it, which one do I go to, and then searching through. So the whole issue of arch wires has historically been very complicated. So we're excited to just now as we're speaking to be releasing some new arch wires and entirely new arch wire sequencing protocol. And our new arch wires, Ed, are, believe it or not, 3 arch wires and 3 arch wires only. So we are going to be starting. So we're taking all the complexity out of arch wires and moving it into a brand new, really, really exciting, simple 3 arch wire sequence. And it's really facilitated by the sagittal first concept. So remember, we talked about, and as you know, taking these different types of cases, moderate to whatever types of cases they are, transforming them into a class 1 case, a simple, relatively simple class 1 case. That enables us now to step into a larger arch wire earlier, and then finishing with 2 more. So the brand new wire that we've developed is an 015 copper NiTi. Now that's bigger, that's larger than most clinicians are used to using, but it's absolutely possible and really works terrific because, again, you're coming out of the sagittal first phase, so the teeth are already in motion, right?
Yeah, you have space. You have absolute space in the
So you can very comfortably get into an 015, which we're calling M1. It's the new wires are called the M1 series. So you start out with an M1 arch wire, then you go to the M2, which is an 18 squared, and then you finish in a 1925 CNA, which is a titanium molybdenum alloy wire.
Are the first 2 titanium?
They are. The first 2
NiTi?
Yes, the first 2 are copper NiTi wires, 015, 18 squared, and then to the 1925 CNA. So that's as simple as this: M1, M2, and M3 for finishing.
Wonderful. And how about the shape? Are we going with an ovoid or?
Oh yeah. They are broad arch forms. They are the broad arch because, again, just like you said, we're looking for these full smiles, broad arches, airway friendly.
Beautiful.
The whole airway friendly concept. Absolutely.
Yeah, that is a beautiful thing. But I'm really excited about your new Align product.
So the new aligners, I'm glad you asked about that. So right, we are as well. The world, for aesthetically conscious of the patients, which are more and more patients every day, not just adults anymore, but even a lot of adolescents and teens are looking for a real, a true aesthetic solution. And so when we began our project on our aligner project, we had relatively modest ambitions. We were hoping, hey, let's get something on the market that's quite similar to the big player in the space. But as we were doing our work and working with our engineers and clinicians, we actually came across some manufacturing processes that enabled us to produce aligners in an entirely different method than any other aligner company in the world. And our processes have yielded an aligner that is totally crystal clear. It's clear the day you take it out of the package, and it's clear a week or even 2 weeks later when it's ready to change aligners. But much more important than that is the fact that our aligners do not require, in most cases, in many cases, attachments. And whether it's far fewer attachments or no attachments at all. And why is that so important? Attachments have become the bane of the existence of patients, not just patients, but clinicians as well.
Oh, yeah. It's terrible. I mean, when you demand or I should say not deband, but remove aligners on the last day. I mean, you're there grinding attachments off 10, 15 of them off every case.
Yeah, and absolutely, and putting them on, finding the right places to position them, and preparing the teeth, but placing the attachments, and then sometimes an attachment doesn't stay on, just like a bracket. Sometimes they fail. Then you got to replace that attachments if the case has to go into refinement, which so many with the other brand do require refinements. Oftentimes you got to remove the attachments, put on new ones in different shapes, different places. So the chair time has become very, very significant.
Well, I can't say that I've actually used one of your aligner products just yet, but I intend to. But I can tell you I have seen them, and they are much, much clearer than any other aligner product that I've ever seen.
And patients love that. Patients look at them side by side and they say, yes, of course I want that one on the right. I want the clear one. I'm looking for a clear solution. I'd like a clear aligner. And if you can get me a clear aligner and improve my smile.
Even if it costs a little more.
Even if it costs a little more, which incidentally it doesn't. We're very, very price competitive.
That's what impressed me. Is actually you're very, very, very competitive with the rest of the market, which I think will get you a lot more noticed very, very quickly. So, and anyway, Ted, you brought us up to date with all your products. You've talked to us about how good and how efficient most of the ones that you've been brought out so far have been. And I can't thank you enough for being on Orthodontic Smiles podcast. I mean, it's always great to have people like you because you really give us the future. You help us understand what orthodontics is going to be like in the next 10 years, and that I so appreciate you coming on and being there for us who are looking to the future for what's next and how can we make our patients happier and best served. So thank you very much, Ted Dreifuss from Henry Schein Orthodontics.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
This is your host, Dr. Ed Gonzalez. I want to thank you for listening to Orthodontic Smiles today. If you enjoyed our broadcast, please click the subscribe button. We'll be in touch with you in the future about our further broadcasts. Thanks for listening.